Medicine exists because when we are not feeling well, we need some way to try to correct that, to feel better in the broadest possible sense.
There are two things that are absolutely fundamental. The first is that we can't generalize about either Greek or Chinese medicine because they're both highly heterogeneous. And the second thing that's perhaps even more important is not to assume that health is a robust, cross-cultural universal, because ideas about health, ideas about disease, ideas about treatment do vary. And that's one of the important lessons that can be derived from a comparison of the evidence that we've got. One of the important questions for a comparative study relates to how anybody achieved any authority in the question of treatment. When somebody feels ill or not well, why should they go to anybody in particular to treat them? So that's a fundamental question.
Aristotle says not only that the better doctors also study philosophy, but he also thinks that philosophers should also study medicine. Of course, this is in a context where any educated person would know about medicine, because you would have to decide which doctor to trust.
In Greece, there are temples that specialized in producing cures, as they claimed. They set up inscriptions describing the cures that had been achieved at Pidavros and in Athens and, of course, in Kos. There were important shrines where people came to be healed, courtesy of the fact that the shrines were blessed with the support of gods. It was Asclepius or Apollo or whoever. There weren't such well-organized religious shrines doing the same thing in China, but there is nevertheless a tradition of characters who are called Wu in Chinese, who did operate in a different way from those who apprenticed themselves to the literate doctors. These were people who had supernatural powers, but we've got to be very careful about supernatural because that tends to imply that there's a natural to contrast with it. And in China, there isn't really a single concept of nature that does the same job as nature in English or physis in classical Greek.
Very interestingly, before the Han Dynasty, the Chinese, in fact, did not have specific medicine people. They were the diviners who foretold the future and spoke to the spirits, above all, who determined what it was that was killing people. And this process, of course, almost entirely restricted to a small elite at the court, was very important to the profession of the diviner, talking to the spirits, who will have caused the sickness in their eyes.
It may have been a little bit different for women in antiquity because women, in a sense, faced a regular and, in a way, predictable kind of medical crisis in the form of childbirth. So the act of carrying a child and giving birth to it presented a life or death kind of engagement every single time. And it was something that was happening all the time. And so we see evidence that women in particular did develop special relationships with protective deities and also had regular relationships with midwives and other female, we could say medical practitioners who may not have been physicians in the sense that Galen was a physician, but clearly had much experience and expertise in this and would help guide them through the process. So it's very difficult to generalize when we're looking back at the ancient world about what the kinds of medical engagement, how regular those would have been. But it seems that for the most part, except for the very wealthy, except for the elite, things like regular preventative checkups that are so common today were not the norm.